The wind screamed across the ridge, a living thing tearing at metal and skin. Snow sliced sideways through the dark, stinging her face as Lieutenant Commander Maya Steele braced against the cliff's edge. The mountain wasn't supposed to turn into a battlefield, but missions never die where you plan them to. Around her, voices shouted through static and rage. Her own team, faces she'd trained with, slept beside, trusted with her life. Now their rifles were aimed at her. Riker's voice, cold and certain, cut through the chaos. "You gave us up, Steele. You compromised the mission." She tried to speak, but her words vanished into the storm. There was no trial, no proof, just the echo of boots grinding snow and the sudden shove that ripped the world away. The air swallowed her whole. Time slowed, sound disappeared. For a heartbeat, she saw only the glow of their headlamps above, growing smaller as she fell. Gravity took her, twisting her body in freefall, wind howling in her ears like laughter. But instinct, older than fear, kicked in. Her hand found a torn rope still anchored to the rock. Pain exploded through her shoulder as it caught. Her fall stopped, the world snapping back into motion. She hung suspended in fog and fury, heart hammering, breath crystallizing. Betrayal burned hotter than the cold. Up above, Riker's silhouette turned away. They thought it was over. They thought gravity would finish what betrayal began. But they forgot something. SEALs don't need ropes to climb. Now, before we show you what really happened after that fall, hit that like button and tell us in the comments what country you're watching from. Because after this mission, no one will ever underestimate a SEAL again. The silence after the fall was almost holy, the kind that pressed against her eardrums until even her heartbeat felt too loud. Maya lay twisted on a narrow ledge carved by centuries of wind, one boot hanging into the abyss. Her pack was gone. Her rifle vanished. The radio that could have called salvation lay in splintered pieces beside her, blinking its last dying light before the snow swallowed it whole. Every breath sent a knife of pain up her arm, and when she touched it, she felt the slick warmth of blood beneath the glove. Her shoulder throbbed where the rope had caught her, torn muscle, maybe worse. The mountain didn't care. It just stared back, ancient and silent, as if asking whether she was worth keeping alive. Far below, through a break in the fog, she saw it, a scattering of orange lights in the valley. The enemy camp, the one her team was sent to infiltrate. Except those weren't enemies anymore, were they? Not to Riker. She could make out silhouettes moving around fires, crates stacked, radios flashing. Her operation, her intel, her mission turned inside out. They hadn't just betrayed her, they'd switched sides. For profit, for power, for the kind of reasons that got good people buried without a flag. Maya ripped a strip from her undershirt, teeth clenched against the cold, and bound her arm tight. The fabric darkened fast, but it would hold long enough. She leaned her head against the rock, trying to remember how it felt to breathe without fire in her lungs. That's when she heard it. Her father's voice, clear as if the wind had carried it down from somewhere higher. "The climb doesn't kill you, Steele. Quitting does." The words hit harder than the mountain ever could. He'd said it years ago during training in the Rockies, when she'd fallen face first into snow and wanted to stay there. Back then, it was just motivation. Tonight, it was survival. She flexed her fingers, ignoring the sting, and reached for the rock above her. Nails split, blood slicked the stone, but she found a hold. Then another. Each pull tore skin, strained muscle, stole air. Still, she climbed. The cliff loomed endless, an unbroken scar of ice and granite. But she didn't look up. She only looked at the next inch, the next handhold, the next breath, the next heartbeat that refused to stop. The mountain didn't forgive weakness. Neither did betrayal. And Maya Steele wasn't about to die for either. The dawn didn't break. It crept, thin and gray, over a ridge that looked carved from bone. Frost bit at her fingers as Maya dragged herself over the last outcrop, chest heaving, breath clouding the air in ragged bursts. Her world had shrunk to the rhythm of survival. Grip, pull, breathe. Now, at the tree line, the silence broke with a low crackle of radio chatter. She froze, pressing herself into the frost-bitten bark of a pine. The voices were faint, distorted, but clear enough. Confirmed. The leak's been silenced. Package moves at 1900. It was Riker's voice, steady, smug, alive. He was still on the ridge, close enough for the mountain to carry his betrayal back to her. Another voice answered, laughter buried in static. Didn't think she'd go so easy. Maya's jaw tightened. They thought the cliff had done their work. They'd buried her in their minds before gravity even finished its pull. She whispered to the wind, the words cold and clean as steel. You buried the wrong seal. She began moving through the pines, slow and deliberate, like a shadow learning to breathe again. Her fingers brushed against something half buried in the snow. A corpse, one of the local mercenaries Riker's team had hired for muscle. His eyes were glazed, his gear still intact. She took what she needed, a field knife, a half-empty canteen, a cracked drone battery with a faint hum of power left in it. The dead didn't need tools. The living did. She stripped wire from the drone casing, coiled it tight, and tested the current against her thumb. A spark, enough to ignite a flare or charge a detonator. She smiled through split lips. Tools were just opportunities waiting to be named. She used a broken tree branch to carve a shallow trench, setting tripwires low between roots. She wasn't building traps for the sake of violence. She was shaping the battlefield, turning their arrogance into her weapon. Each motion triggered a memory, another life, another kind of training. Coronado, night drills, salt water burning her lungs as instructors screamed overhead. You don't drown. One had barked, kicking sand into her face. You adapt. You fight the water until it learns your name. Later, during cliff ascents, she'd heard it again. When you're out of options, steal. You become the option. Back then, it had sounded like a metaphor. Now it was her heartbeat. By mid-morning, her traps were set, simple, precise, merciless. A snare of tripwire here, a flare trigger near the ridge there. Nothing fancy, just enough to turn confusion into chaos. Her body ached. Her blood was half ice, but her mind was surgical, cutting through fear with purpose. She could already see the ridge as they would, calm, safe, unguarded. And she would be waiting, unseen, the ghost they created with their own hands. The betrayal had stripped everything away, her team, her mission, her faith. What was left wasn't weakness. It was focus. She was no longer surviving the mountain. The mountain was surviving her. Fog crawled up the ridge like smoke from a sleeping dragon, swallowing sound, swallowing light. By the time the first man went missing, Riker's team still thought they were the hunters. The comms crackled, faint with interference, just static and breathing. Then the silence returned, heavier than before. Maya moved through it like a rumor, low to the ground, eyes reading the dark for movement and shape. The traps she'd set were simple, but the mind behind them wasn't. A loose tripwire here, a flare line buried under snow there. Each one positioned to disorient, not destroy. Fear was her weapon now, precision her edge. When the second man vanished, the others broke formation. It always happened that way. Panic scattered soldiers faster than bullets ever could. One shouted her name, voice cracking through the fog. Steele, you hear me? You don't have to. His words ended in a sharp grunt as she cut the line he clung to. The rope snapped free, his scream echoing into the valley below. No triumph, no rage, just execution, clean, controlled, clinical. In her head, the seal code surfaced, cold as steel. In the absence of order, create your own. She stripped a radio from the fallen man and tuned into their frequency. Fragments of panic came through. Riker's voice, sharp with command. Regroup at Point Echo. She's not alive. She can't be alive. His certainty was beginning to tremble. She smiled, whispering into the dead channel. Then start questioning what else you got wrong. Static swallowed her words, but she knew he'd feel them. The fog thickened as she moved closer to the camp. Her pulse slowed, mind quiet, steps rehearsed. Each takedown followed the same rhythm she'd drilled for years. Assess, engage, vanish. She found another of her betrayers kneeling near a signal flare, scanning the mist. A shift of weight, a whisper of snow, and her knife pressed against his throat before he could inhale. Say it, she murmured. He didn't. She dragged him backward into the dark until he went limp. Speed, surprise, violence of action. The words weren't brutality. They were math. But then came the hesitation. The kid, barely 23, still carried the nervous twitch of someone who'd never fired on a friend before. He turned when she stepped from the fog, rifle trembling in his grip. Don't, she said, calm, unarmed. His finger froze on the trigger. Behind the fear, she saw guilt, a crack in the armor. She grabbed him by the vest, slammed him against the rock, knife flashing to his throat, but not cutting. Why? She demanded. He choked out the truth between shivers. Riker hadn't just betrayed command. He'd erased his own disgrace. A failed mission years back, civilians dead under his call. He'd sold this ops intel to a local warlord to buy silence. And she, Maya, had stumbled too close to uncovering it. That's why she'd been framed. For a long moment, neither spoke. Snow gathered in his hair, his breath fogging the air between them. He was young enough to still believe orders could make sense. Maya lowered the knife. You get to live with the truth, she said quietly. That's harder. She turned, leaving him in the fog, weaponless but alive. The mountain was still, waiting. Somewhere ahead, Riker barked commands to ghosts that wouldn't answer. His team was gone, taken by fear, silence, or gravity. Only he remained, the architect of his own collapse. And Maya was coming, not as the woman he betrayed, but as the reckoning he deserved. The ridge waited like an old scar, familiar, cold, and patient. Every inch Maya climbed felt like reclaiming something that had been stolen: breath, blood, dignity. The snow burned her lungs now, not her skin. Somewhere above, the faint thump of rotor blades churned the air, steady and growing louder. Extraction. Riker hadn't just survived, he was escaping. The thought tightened something in her chest, not anger, but precision. This mountain had seen her fall. Tonight, it would see her rise. She moved with purpose, a ghost stitching herself back into the world. Along the climb, she'd salvaged what she needed from a half-sunken crate of sea, for left behind by the mercenaries. Not much, but enough to turn rock into thunder. She wired the charges with trembling hands, connecting the drone battery as a detonator. Each connection sparked like heartbeat to heartbeat. Nearby, she wedged signal flares into crevices, angling them toward the summit. When they ignited, they'd paint the sky red, a warning, a weapon, and a signature all at once. Riker's voice drifted down through the fog, barking into his comm, package secured. Works filing. No hostiles in sight. The arrogance in his tone hit harder than the cold ever could. He stood where he'd pushed her. Same boots, same ridge, same indifference. She almost smiled. Some men never learned that gravity had two directions. The helicopter's shadow broke through the mist, rotors chopping the air. Timing was everything. Maya exhaled, steady, thumb hovering over the trigger. When Riker reached for the chopper's door, she pressed down. The mountain erupted in light and sound, signal flares screaming upward, detonations cracking the ridge like thunder. The pilots jerked against the blinding flash, their instruments flaring white. The bird spun sideways, clipped the ledge, and came down hard. Metal shrieked. Fire bit into the snow. When the smoke parted, Maya stepped through it, rope burns raw on her palms, frost tangled in her hair. Riker stumbled from the wreckage, half-dazed, pistol shaking in his hand. You should have stayed dead, he spat. She didn't flinch. You should have checked your ropes. They collided, no words left between them, just the sharp rhythm of impact, breath, and will. He was bigger, but she was trained for endurance, not dominance. Every strike landed with calculation, knee, elbow, leverage. He fought with fury, she fought with memory. When he tried to drag her toward the cliff's edge, she pivoted, using his momentum, flipping him hard onto the rock. The wind howled like applause. He gasped, reaching for the pistol again. She kicked it away, the barrel skittering into the void. Then she pulled the zip cuffs from her belt, standard issue, poetic in its irony, and snapped them around his wrists, anchoring him to the twisted metal of the wreck. He thrashed once, then stopped, the realization dawning slow and sour. Maya lit a rescue flare, its red glow cutting through the gray. For the first time, the mountain didn't feel like an enemy. It felt like a witness. She stood over Riker, eyes steady, the light painting her in fire. This wasn't vengeance. It was balance. The morning came slowly, soft and golden against the jagged ridge that had once tasted blood. Smoke curled upward in thin ribbons, the wreckage now quiet except for the faint hum of dying machinery. Maya sat with her back to the rock, exhaustion stitched into every breath, eyes fixed on the horizon where light finally began to break through the fog. The flare she'd set still hissed nearby, its red glow fading into dawn. For the first time in days, she didn't need to move, fight, or hide. The mountain had taken what it demanded. Everything else was silence. Down the slope, Riker stirred, the cuffs biting into his wrists. He was alive, barely, but that was the point. She'd given him what he hadn't given her, a chance to face what he'd done. Above them, the sound of rotors approached again, this time not as a threat, but as salvation. A NATO bird, black silhouette against pale light. The radio on her shoulder crackled back to life, voice sharp with command. Unidentified unit, respond. Maya pressed the transmit key, her tone calm, level, professional. Target secured. Mission integrity restored. Steel out. Then she let the handset fall silent against the snow. Minutes later, boots crunched over gravel and voices echoed through the clearing. Rescuers found Riker where she'd left him, bound to twisted metal, blinking against daylight. And they found her sitting just beyond him, leaning against the stone like it was an old friend. Her uniform was torn, her skin raw, but her eyes were steady. No anger, no victory, just something deeper. As the helicopter's blades kicked up snow around her, she looked once more toward the horizon, her voice calm in the wind. They pushed me off a cliff to bury me. They forgot. The deeper you fall, the higher you climb. You just watched the moment a soldier refused to die where they left her. She was pushed off a cliff, stripped of her purpose, her trust, her team, and she still climbed back. Not because she had to, but because she chose to. That's the difference between those who break and those who become unbreakable. Betrayal isn't the end. It's the beginning of clarity. The moment the noise falls away, and you learn what kind of warrior you really are. So here's the question. If the world cut your ropes, if the people you trusted turned their backs, could you climb back? Could you fight gravity with nothing but your will? Because that's where every legend starts. Not in victory, but in the fall before it. If that hits something in you, then you already know what kind of person you are. Warriors don't wait for perfect ground, they make it. Tell me your answer below. And if you believe that warriors never fall, they rise, then hit subscribe. The next mission's coming. You'll want to be ready.